My friends, Donald Trump has classified the PCC and the Red Command as terrorist organizations. And today, here with me, Mauricio Galante, directly from Texas, United States, and the Navy Captain Battistella. Guys, we are at war. Why do I ask this? Because in Iran, it happened exactly like this, and boom, everything exploded. Could this happen here? Galante, my friend, you who are behind the scenes at the White House, I know you know things that we don't know yet. Galante, tell us everything.
I can't tell everything, but what I can say is that the time for diplomacy, talking, and deadlines ran out a long time ago. Now is the time for action. The Trump administration made it clear that it will strictly follow the security plan laid out in the National Security Strategy. And did it go after the cartels in Brazil? Is that right? It went after the cartels in Mexico, the cartels in Guatemala, and the cartels in the past in El Salvador. And things are going to heat up. There will be a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth.
Man, we're also there with Commander Battistella, who's an intelligence and counterintelligence analyst, which means, guys, he hunts spies, right? Commander, we have a lot of espionage, especially now, right? This counterintelligence work is essential, Commander Battistella.
Without a doubt, you're absolutely right. I agree. It's one of the relevant aspects of this classification. Now, despite the diplomatic issues, the political issues that will certainly be involved, I think Galante will explore this subject throughout our conversation. But from the perspective of intelligence and counterintelligence, yes, the aspects that will now be involved. Yes, perhaps the need for interaction between agencies from Brazil and the United States, several agencies regarding the exchange of confidential information and cooperation in the intelligence field. In turn, counterintelligence is also necessary to ensure the protection of the people involved in this. I'll mention an example that was made public. It's on social media in publicly available sources. In Mexico, cartels monitored the U.S. consulate and as a result managed to identify in some way that among those Americans who were coming and going there for some time, right, during the surveillance period, one of them was an intelligence agent. I'm not sure if it was the FBI or CIA, but I think it was the FBI, and he was assassinated. So this shows the importance of counterintelligence in all these aspects.
Galante, are you going to tell us a bit about what went on behind the scenes during Flavio Bolsonaro's visit? You're going to tell the truth because the press only lied here in Brazil. But there's a detail, Commander, that this would have happened perfectly if Lula wanted it, right? Lula didn't want it. Lula gave the answer, right? It was 2 weeks. Lula didn't present any plans, so he said no right to Trump's face. Galante. That's because it's no use for Trump to say, no, we're going after the cartels, if Lula doesn't want to go after the cartels, doesn't want to fight the PCC. What's going to happen, Galante?
That's something the Trump administration has been consistent about in Trump 2.0. Notice that the Brazilian government is going through the same stages of engagement used with the Iranian and Venezuelan governments, which culminated in the capture of Maduro. Yeah, you have Cuba now. At first, the attempt at direct diplomatic conversation. Let's go, let's talk. What's our problem? My help to help you. Yeah, this was done with Iran. This was done with Venezuela in Iran. In this case, look, if you hand over your radioactive material here, you end your missile program. And then we could have a solution to end this, to end the economic blockade, right? With the economic sanctions which have been there for decades, right? With Iran. In Venezuela, it's the same thing. And it culminated in that statement, come and get me, cowards, right? From Maduro. And then when it goes past a certain limit, the United States knows the right moment, which is exactly what I just referred to. It's in the national security strategy, which is to reestablish hemispheric security. With regard to public security, with regard to ending fentanyl trafficking, which used to kill 107,000 people per year. Regarding overdoses on the streets of the United States last year, that number dropped to almost 70,000. In other words, the plan that's being implemented has already saved 30,000 lives in a year. And their goal is to completely dismantle these drug cartels in Latin America. So now it's Brazil's turn. Why? Because the situation in Iran is stabilizing, and you already have the situation in Venezuela almost restabilized, just waiting for a presidential election to put in power the person who actually won the election. We're discussing this topic because it will affect the Brazilian elections, specifically the voting machines and math, and we still need to see if the United States will accept it. And the deadline that was given, I'm not the one saying this, Lula himself said it, 2 weeks expired without any concrete action from the Brazilian government. Look, this is what we're going to do. And this triggered the process where, look, the phase of talking with the Brazilian government is over. So what do we have on the table? And the advisors brought up, we have your candidate, the former President Bolsonaro, on the table. Call him in to talk. And that conversation revealed information that he wasn't giving as much importance to the fact that a quarter of the Brazilian population lives under the rule of drug trafficking. And the living conditions inside these communities, which are actually slums, the word community is just a euphemism, right? It's just a euphemism, yeah. They live under worse conditions than under Sharia law, which is an internal American issue. They understand it very well. They make their own Islamic law inside these places. Texas and Florida governments both banned it. And this was brought to him and he was shocked. He had no idea how big the problem was. And from there, a series of events followed, which culminated in unilateral meetings between Flavio Bolsonaro's team with Marco Rubio himself and with the vice president himself, Vance. So now you have the three closest people to Trump agree that, look, regime change in Brazil is necessary at this moment. And the authorization to post the photos on social media makes it clear that President Lula's visit had no protocol at all. No photos were authorized. I don't know if it was by Trump's team or Lula's team, but Flavio Bolsonaro was authorized. There was a photo. There was a little symbolic medal as a gift. There were follow-up meetings with the people who really make things happen. They called the shots, right? So you see that the treatment he received up until now was the treatment of a head of state. Go ahead, Commander.
That's an interesting observation, Galante, but yes, there's a whole political implication to this visit by the prospective presidential candidate to the White House. I believe you're going to keep exploring this political issue. I would just like to add something to this topic that, in a way, this isn't really a new subject, right? The issue of classifying these two factions that have been under pressure isn't something new, and I'll even go a bit further, Galante. It's not just from the second Trump administration. If we look at what's happening in Portugal, with that reach already extending overseas, on the other side of the Atlantic in Portugal, where there have already been drug seizures on the high seas near Cape Verde, which implies the departure from Brazilian ports and connects, right? This export through Brazilian ports and links organized crime. The situation there, Italy has already signaled its opposition regarding the activities of these factions in Europe, and recently the proximity of our neighboring country here, Paraguay, right? So all of this, in my view, shows that, picking up on what Shimon Oliveira mentioned, right? And it really seems that the Brazilian press gave a lot of attention. Of course, the subject deserves it. Porém, however, there were already signs. What I would say is this: good intelligence analysts who were following the subject can't say they were surprised by this decision. And there is, yeah, good.
And there's Spain, right? Spain also just this week launched a crackdown there on drug seizures, trafficking, influence peddling, and corruption. And most importantly, in Spain was supplying industrial components to Iran, which then passed them on to Hezbollah and Hamas. These components were used to make explosives to be used in the war against Israel and against the United States. Spain, which has a direct connection with Maduro in Venezuela, it's all interconnected, isn't it, Galante?
Spain, a NATO member, refused to authorize the United States to use its bases to carry out the attack on Iran. And just yesterday, there was an order to withdraw American troops from Spain. So, what does it mean to be a NATO member? Will they be militarily restricted by the United States? That's right. What's interesting in this story is that the people who used to flee from Venezuela or operated inside Spain would flee, as they put it, they would flee to Venezuela. Actually, they were operating inside Spain. And since in the world of intelligence, there are no coincidences, right? Where is Lula's son living? Bam, in Spain. But in Spain, yeah, just to qualify what Commander Bastella said here, what is very important is the issue of security, persecution, monitoring, persecution, and assassination of the American intelligence officer at the embassy there and in Mexico as well. This cooperation between the police, the sharing of intelligence, has been happening for a long time. What changes now with the classification? It's that instead of the problem being treated as a police matter, it's now a fight against drug trafficking. DEA, DIA, just the DIA and the FBI. Now the CIA and the armed forces are coming into the equation. Why? Because by law, the CIA operates in foreign territory and the armed forces operate in foreign territory. These intelligence cells, for gathering, monitoring, and even neutralization, they have to have judicial authorization. So, with the classification of these groups as terrorists, that judicial authorization, which creates delays in the process, slows down the collection and action process, no longer exists. The operator himself, the military operator, wherever in the world he may be, has a blank check to carry out actions, and the one who directly authorizes these actions is the American president, because the CIA reports directly to the American president. That's over now. Like, look, there's PCC people here laundering money in this bank. Give me a search warrant so I can raid their house to search and seize. No, call the White House. Trump, can we go into the guy's house? Go ahead, they go in. Do you understand how fast things are going to happen from now on? Damn, if not 10 times faster, 50 times faster?
So that's it. Now you can understand, Commander, you can understand why so many congressmen, so many senators, so many politicians, judges, journalists are shitting themselves. It's not because Lula was opposed by Trump. It's not because there's a political problem, a lack of political support. Yes, that exists, and Lula was really humiliated politically, but I think it's much deeper than that. Why? Because we know that the bosses, right, the bosses of organized crime, of the PCC, of the Comando Vermelho, of the factions, they wear suits and ties and they walk around there in the Three Powers Plaza in Brasilia. And that's why there's this desperation, because it's really something very deep, Commander.
I'm going to take a geographical shift from what you said about Brasilia and bring it to Faria Lima. Thank you.
Let's go. Great. Perfect. Let's go.
Because that's what it is. That's the issue. If we go back to the hidden carbon. So when you deal with the political issue there in Brasilia, we have the financial issue is about the operationalization of this, which involves one of the most famous avenues in São Paulo, Faria.
Lima, the fintechs, right? The fintechs.
The banks, wow.
Man.
And I would say that from the intelligence perspective, intelligence concerns, we have two branches here. State intelligence, which directly involves the BIN and the federal police. We can talk about this maybe later on, but now bringing up the issue of how this impacts the corporate sector. And then we think about banks, retail, or ports, right, which also have a large private sector component. In this trade in cargo, soybeans, and so on, what is shipped out with agribusiness and all that, we'll see. We noticed the need for intelligence operators to start paying attention to financial intelligence, because now of the essential aspects, if we separate the kinetic side, the military side, the action, whether it's police or military in relation to the fight, right? The kinetic part of this subject, the intelligence part, which isn't based on concrete actions, not with weapons, but with intelligence operations, which will now have enormous importance for the banks. So the intelligence side for banks, fintechs, and companies, because now the reputational issue is at stake. The reputational issue of companies, which can be affected due to the enforcement of the law when a bank is sanctioned, when people from the corporate world are sanctioned, because even indirectly they allowed transactions that may be classified as suspicious or criminal in terms of money laundering. So this operational arm of intelligence now is undeniably, in my opinion, in my view, it will gain significant reinforcement.
It's banks, it's television, it's everything you can think of, transportation companies, port control. Hey, Galante, it's deep. Go ahead, Commander. Go ahead, Commander. Say it, Commander.
Just picking up another point then about intelligence, but from the counterintelligence side, there's a concern. The counterintelligence operator has to deal with counter-propaganda and disinformation processes. I believe you might be the most qualified person to talk about this, Oximo, but a good operator, a good counterintelligence analyst, he needs to have this perspective on what's being said about the subject, which leads to disinformation. So there's also this whole aspect of what's being commented on, talked about, and discussed about the subject, which instead of being handled technically, leads to disinformation.
Yes, and the floodgates were opened yesterday. The order was given yesterday, right? You can see Globo, CNN, Bandeirante, all of them treating the subject as if Trump wants to invade Brazil's sovereignty. It's a shallow narrative, right? Because Trump doesn't want anything from Brazil, right? Brazil needs the help of the United States, not the other way around. But the narrative has started, and it's a shallow narrative that only talks about sovereignty, economic problems. Trump wanted a reason to impose sanctions on Brazil. And really, they hide PCC, Comando Vermelho, Faria Lima, Brasilia, politicians, and Foro de São Paulo behind this narrative. And look, all of them are repeating exactly the same narrative. It seems like the Planalto wrote the briefing, and now they're all repeating it. But Galante and Commander, I feel that the people looked at the following issue. Look, Flavio Bolsonaro achieved what Lula didn't want to do, which is something very simple for the housewife, which is, wow, I feel safer now. My son will be safer on the streets. My grandson will be safer on the streets. So the press can go ahead and have a meltdown. I saw the Globo journalists wanting to kill themselves like that. Why? Because of the despair this caused. First, their ego was hurt, right? Because they said that Flavio Bolsonaro was already dead, politically. Then, what's underneath it all? We see fintechs pouring millions into TV advertising, right? That's where it starts, but nobody looks into that, right? Everything is connected, Galante.
Everything is connected. Yeah, it really is. You have the issue of fintechs in Brazil, which today is the biggest threat to the interests of the United States, not just in Brazil, but in all of South America. I'll give you an example here of how money can be transferred without leaving any traces, without leaving a trail of that money. You have a company or a financial group. It doesn't have to be a company. It can be a financial group, even from drug trafficking, a group set up in Brazil and another one here in the United States. These people have money here and want to send it to Brazil. What do? They send this money to a third party, to another company within the United States. They say, look, I have to send $1 million to Brazil. They find another company here that needs to bring $1 million from Brazil to the United States. They say, no, don't send that money from Brazil to the United States. Yeah, I'll pay you here in the United States, and your company in Brazil pays me $1 million in Brazil. In other words, I get it. The $1 million that should have been transferred never left Brazil. It was transferred between accounts in Brazil and between accounts in the United States. So this tracking of who paid and who received, who did business directly with any fintech connected to members of the PCC and the CV, they already have the list. This is already being done. As Commander Batistella said, this mapping has already been going on for more than 3-4 years. So the names of the people, companies, and financial institutions, whoever received money from them and whoever paid them will be scrutinized. And today, being scrutinized doesn't mean you have 20 operators there analyzing data. No, you have the Anthropic system, which is the artificial intelligence system being used by the Pentagon. My God, no. And it's not ChatGPT, it's not Grok, it's not the block we use here. No.
It's Skynet.
Their system's 1,000 times more powerful. Why? Because they use computers, supercomputers. They have monitoring, management, and data processing capabilities 1,000 times faster than any computer. They use quantum computers. And you have data analysis that used to take 2 or 3 months back in the 80s and 90s. Now it's done in minutes nowadays. So when someone checks, like, who are the companies that received money from that gas station that was selling adulterated gasoline? Where did he deposit it and to whom did he transfer it? You'll have a list of 200 companies in a matter of minutes. So
Galante, Brazil will come to a halt if this operation is really taken seriously. But now I have a question for both of you, for Galante, for the commander, for you to give your opinion. Lula doesn't want to help the United States. Lula doesn't want to help, no. Yeah, but what now? Is it going to be by force?
right, you can't do that.
Is it going to be by force, Galante and the commander? Is it going to be by force? How is it going to be? Because even the commander mentioned, no, there will be collaboration between the federal police, the agencies of Brazil, ABIN, with the CIA, with the FBI. The fact is that there are already many FBI agents and even CIA agents already in Brazil for quite some time. Remember the Special Forces plane that landed in Porto Alegre and all that, right? Planes are landing there every day. We don't see it. We don't notice it, right? But Lula says no, says it's not happening, right? We don't see any news about Lula cooperating. But is he really cooperating? How is this going to happen, Galante and Commander?
Galante, you first. I see. I'll talk about the legal and diplomatic limits of the American government directly interfering in Brazil's internal security. There are these limits, right? At first, the United States will operate within their own legal framework. In other words, there are terrorist organizations, transnational ones, basically attacking the United States, the American economy, attacking internal public security. Because they are trafficking fentanyl and because they are laundering money with other international terrorist agents. And this affects American sovereignty. And where are they attacking from? They are attacking from outside the country, from foreign territory, whether it's Brazil, Colombia, Venezuela, or anywhere else. So American security actions in this territory will indeed have to go through the scrutiny of the federal police and BIN itself, as Commander Bastella pointed out. There is information about individuals, there is information about the operations that will be carried out, and Brazil has been doing that. The government, Lula's government, has been dragging its feet. Everything that is brought to them, there is slowness, it doesn't get done. You have the case of one of the biggest bank heist in Brazil, a cryptocurrency theft. It happened in Brazil, and they fled to Spain. And Spain arrested them. Brazil had a deadline of, I don't know, a month, 2 months to submit the petition to repatriate them to Brazil, to have them sent back from Spain. Extradite. The Ministry of Justice under Lula's government missed and let the deadline expire. And they were released in Spain because there is no formal extradition request against them. So that's what's going to happen. But as you said, not only are American intelligence cells in Brazil, but also Russian cells, Iranian cells, Hezbollah cells, and cells from European countries are in Brazil. So this game is going to heat up a lot. Why? Because today the United States has access to information. They know what's going on. They'll soon see who's helping and who's blocking progress. So diplomatic relations between Brazil and the United States, I see them becoming more difficult at this moment in this election year. And I foresee difficulties in the dealings and relationship between Brazil and the United States until the end of the year.
It's going to get even more strained, right? Because if Lula doesn't want to do it and Trump does, and Trump usually gets what he wants, things will get tense because everything depends on political decisions. But there's also something else, actually another question that someone sent me behind the scenes, for example, this law that Trump has in his favor. Now, since Comando Vermelho and the PCC have been classified as terrorist organizations, it allows the United States to spy on PCC agents. Spy on all these agents, use satellites, wiretaps, even spies or undercover agents. That's allowed. Because after all, you're fighting an enemy that's abusing your sovereignty, that's threatening and killing people inside the United States. What do you think about that?
I agree that it's very likely that the United States uses all its intelligence resources, including the NSA, right? Which has a monitoring capability of what's called SIGINT, signal intelligence. So it's not a conspiracy theory to imagine that the NSA might be involved in this whole operation. Let's say of measures in collecting, and then it's not just collecting, it's searching for data for, let's put it this way, building a picture regarding a certain person, a certain target, a certain company. In this operation we're talking about here related to drug trafficking, and I want to emphasize again regarding financial intelligence in relation to transactions, as Galante explained, regarding the use of offshore companies and shell companies to disguise financial transactions. So I don't think it's crazy for us to imagine that if the NSA or even geospatial intelligence, let's say, in the sense of obtaining images via satellite, in the monitoring, for example, of a vessel or something like that, port-related, where data can be gathered about a certain cargo contamination, as we see this happening in the port of Santos, Paranaguá, and also leaving through the Northeast, fruits that go to Europe. So yeah, that's pretty reasonable. I tend to think there will be a negative reaction. Well, there isn't there, a certain political alignment today between Brazil and the United States. And it seems there will still be a statement. No, I don't mean a spoken statement, but it's very likely that the Palacio do Planalto, Itamaraty, will release some kind of letter today, questioning, condemning the act. It's expected. As a Brazilian citizen, it's obvious that I also want to see Brazil's sovereignty respected. Now, this measure, I say it again, it was planned, it was on the schedule, it's happening. And Brazil, I understand that it should even observe this situation regardless of political and ideological issues. I'm leaving that aside. What I think Brazil should try to do is work together, maintaining its sovereignty and all that, is that we have to fight organized crime. So in what way can the American contribution, in what way can working with these American agencies, this will involve, again, for example, our agency of I forgot the name, if you could help me. Yeah, it's ABENF.
No.
COAF, no, the AFI, COAF.
It's the cough.
There are a number of things involved that, if used well, Brazil will gain in the fight against organized crime, leading to what? To a better social situation for the communities that live under the rule of these groups. And then there's that issue, the operational side of the violence that we see when Avenida Brasil in Rio de Janeiro is shut down because of the shootouts. And we know that behind all this, there are a lot of white-collar types, people in suits and designer ties who run this crime. So all of this together, to wrap up this point, this line of reasoning I'm following, at first, I'm not seeing a kinetic military operation by the United States. No, I'm not seeing that. And I see it much more as an operation involving intelligence gathering and search methods, including, as you said, Shimon, let's say actual agents. You know, agents are those who have espionage techniques, people, espionage, agent. I try not to use that word. I say the agent.
No, but it's a spy. It's a spy.
Yeah, field agent, but someone who will operate in some way to obtain denied information, or who will identify or will mark, as we say, mark the target, the captain. Yes, go ahead.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but nothing. But you yourself said that it's no longer just an imaginable conspiracy theory. It's possible that even Lula might be questioned, right? It's possible that even Lula might be investigated, or people close to Lula, or people who talk to Lula, and then at some point Lula might also be questioned. There's this cross-checking of information, because sometimes, no, Lula has nothing to do with organized crime, but suddenly someone called him, Lula, Lula, help me, Lula. Look,
Your case with Diolani?
Diolani.
Now you're the Diolani case. The Diolani case is a classic case. You have the person who was just arrested now in an operation, laundering money for the PCC, used to go to the Palacio do Planalto, took pictures, wow, made videos, made social media posts together with him and with the operation. First,
of everyone. So,
these issues, imagine someone showing, or if they didn't show it at the meeting, that video of Delaine Diolani with Lula. The webs. That's what the commander said, Commander Bastella. COAF is a very, very competent agency in Brazil. Yeah, but it's being used in a political way because what comes out of COAF is only used for political persecution. Only elements from the right and conservatives, from the opposition to the government. The web of interest, the 300,000 a month that President Lulin's son was receiving, COAF didn't raise a red flag about that. That's true. COAF also didn't report or raise a red flag when it was known that Lula's son had businesses in Spain. Those three PCC members were arrested for laundering 26 billion reais, and the STJ released them in just 2 weeks. In other words, the web is so big that it's really when it is. Intelligence gathering, and I want to emphasize here, the commander says he doesn't see any kinetic operations, but I see search and seizure operations, which are operations with Brazilian boats or ships leaving port. From Itajaí, for example, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, being intercepted by the American Navy. It's a circus, right? Exactly. It's to have a sweep of this ship because there is already intelligence information about the ship. Nowadays, very few people know how these ships do that. Divers in the port of Santos go under the vessel and attach bags or compartments beneath the ship with drugs, weapons, and so on. The people on the ship, the ship's captain, the crew, they're sailing, and they don't know that drugs are tied underneath their ship. Only the person who placed the drugs and the one collecting them at the port of Malaga know about it. But the Brazilian Navy does interesting work in this area. They've already caught this type of operation several times, but then you're going to label that person as a mule. So he's a mule. He doesn't know he's carrying the drugs, but he is carrying them. Then there's the other one, the interceptor, who knows it's drugs and knows what he's carrying. Besides the gangs that are operating inside the airport, not just in Guarulhos, but also in Rio de Janeiro, at Galeão, and others in Brasilia, and other airports in Brazil, where you put your little suitcase, right? It's me, I play golf, right? I get there with my golf bag and check it in. But somewhere between check-in and loading the plane, someone puts contraband inside my golf bag. My golf club bag arrives here at Dallas Airport. When it comes down, someone involved with the PCC. The CV, who works in baggage handling, opens my golf bag, takes out the cabrito, closes my golf bag, and I pick up my golf bag, as if nothing had happened. I became the recipient and courier, a mule, without knowing it. Sometimes there are problems like what happened to 2 Brazilian women who arrived in Germany. The receiver couldn't make that pickup, and they were accused of international drug trafficking. Upstanding people, without knowing anything, were there with 20, 30 kilos inside their suitcases with tags, with their numbers, and they didn't know. So, handling stolen cargo, cargo diversion, cargo transport in the Atlantic Ocean, you'll start to see several operations like that, in which, if it's necessary to override the authority of the Brazilian Federal Police or even the Brazilian regulatory agencies themselves, they will be overridden if it's outside Brazilian territory. And it will look really bad if it's reported that help was requested, nothing was done, and it was intercepted outside Brazilian territory. The United States won't hold back and will say, look, I warned you once, twice, you did nothing, and I arrested him here in the middle of the Atlantic, or I arrested him upon arrival in Atlanta, upon arrival in Miami, and then it will increasingly expose which side President Lula's government is on.
Go ahead, say it.
Go ahead, Commander.
No, I agree with Galante's idea. So, for example, when we talked about COAF, The importance lies with the Federal Revenue Service. The Federal Revenue Service. And the Federal Revenue Service also has its own internal intelligence branch that operates in the ports, and airports. So this attitude, this designation by the American government, I understand, is that despite, I'll repeat what I said a little earlier, despite the political differences between governments, despite that, but there is a chance that here in Brazil, we can grow in terms of combat, enforcement, and intelligence measures for our society to improve the situation of the Brazilian people. Yes, there is room for us to have, because to what extent can Brazil with this have a better relationship? Of these Brazilian agencies, we're talking about state agencies. The Federal Revenue Service belongs to the Brazilian state. It's there. It's a permanent agency. How can the armed forces, or how can armed forces intelligence be used, especially if we think about the army, because of its presence along the borders, so that the military personnel who are in the intelligence agencies from the military organizations on the border can somehow pay more attention to this. The Navy at sea, the Air Force, when it comes to air transport, right? Whether it's civil aviation, military aviation, and so on. So there is plenty of room for us to grow with this and improve the actions of the Brazilian state against this unfortunate situation that has grown and spread from Brazil. Brazil has become the center of this tension, perhaps largely due to Brazilians' fault, due to the fault of the Brazilian Congress, okay? Which didn't pay attention to this in the last, I think we could say, over the past decades. And we've reached this stage of having factions operating in Europe, as I've already mentioned.
Do you think this improves ordinary people's lives, right? Like Mrs. Maria, little Maria, who goes to the market, everything is expensive there. Lower the price of beans. That's it. Hey, Galante, lower the price of meat. This whole operation by the United States. Because in the end, that's what matters, right? To have the people's support. What's the perception?
At first, I don't see this classification changing or significantly improving the life of the average Brazilian. What happens is the regime will have to take a stand. The regime has suffered a major setback today. It will have to take a stand. It's revealing itself. You yourself pointed out the counter-information operations that are happening in the mainstream media, on TV, and even within elements of the government, defending a so-called sovereignty that hasn't existed in a long time, okay? We discussed how a quarter of Brazil's territory has been taken over. 50 million Brazilians, just look at the size of Mexico, people who are living under the rule of drug traffickers and their own laws. What happens is these groups will be concerned with, sorry. He knows that.
Sorry, Galante, for interrupting you, but it's just to point this out to our audience so they can also share this information with others, because even we Brazilians didn't know this a few months ago, right? Yeah, Trump found out about that. And where does this information come from? Go ahead.
Where does this information come from? The data that 25% of people in Brazil live in areas controlled by drug trafficking came from the federal police itself. A federal police report at the end of 2024. And this should shock any Brazilian. It should shock any Brazilian public official. And apparently Trump was not aware of the size of the problem Brazil had with drug trafficking and how far drug trafficking reached and where it operated. It's the size of Mexico's population, 50 million people. And that really caught his attention. When this was brought to him, he realized that, look, we really wasted a lot of time here trying to talk with the government, that apparently they are founders of the São Paulo Forum. They have connections with Maduro, connections with Petro, connections with Spurious, with several others, with Deolane. I don't even know if he knows about Deolane. Damn, man. But what really hit him was the moment he realized, look, we're spinning our wheels here, wasting time here. Now is the time for action. Since the deadline had already expired, he took action. That's it.
Go ahead, Commander.
Simão, may I throw out a provocative point to you, the audience, and Galante? Can I ask a question?
Go ahead, go on.
Hey!
It's not really a question, but more a point to reflect on. Maybe we don't have the answer yet. We will remember back in 2006 in São Paulo when there was in a way, a stronger action by the civil police of Sao Paulo. Military police of Sao Paulo, where several military police stations were attacked, blown up with grenades and so on. That, at the time, was a reaction from the PCC to a police action, right? Apparently, at the time, there was some kind of agreement, some kind of let's try to calm this situation down approach. I would ask a question as an intelligence analyst, trying to outline the scenario now for the next few days, for the next few weeks, considering that the World Cup is coming up in a few weeks. What will be the reaction of the leadership, right, of these organizations regarding this? Will they remain silent? Will they publish an explanatory note, a press release? Or will they issue an order? A violent reaction here in Brazil? Or will this trigger some kind of upheaval inside Brazilian prisons? Or I would still ask, will this make even stronger? I can't say for sure, I can't confirm, but it seems to me that at certain times, PCC and CV are mortal enemies. However, there is data that indicates at certain times that PCC and CV are allied. And then they divide the territory. I, as an intelligence analyst, can't confirm that.
The War of Agora.
Are they going to ally and try to respond or what? Yeah, attacking people in the streets to say, we have control and we won't back down. Those are provocations that show a lack of intelligence analysis.
Good. Galante, let me just spice things up and then you can go ahead. I'll set it up and you kick it, Galante. In El Salvador, it happened exactly the same way and in the same sequence of events. In El Salvador, Bukele came in. Bukele decided to fight crime. Crime doubled down and started killing people. You want to fight crime? Then we're going to destabilize you and show the people that fighting crime is dangerous. There was an occasion when they killed more than 90 random people there, more than 80 random people on the street. Every half hour they killed someone on the street. So what did Bukele do? Is that so? You want terror? I'll give you the terror you're asking for. And El Salvador became what it is today. Good prevailed. But there's a detail. Bukele had to go beyond the Constitution's bounds and redraw them where they needed to be. He didn't commit any illegal acts. Is the field too narrow? Let's widen the field so we can play this game. In Brazil, do we have anyone who does that? Well, it seems that Flavio Bolsonaro stepped up saying, I'm a volunteer. So, what about it, Galante?
I see the initial concern, which the commander mentioned here, including the physical safety of American public officials working in Brazil. I see the concern for CEOs of companies, American company executives in Brazil. They're soft targets, as we call them. They're targets of opportunity. Yeah, I also see Flavio having to double his personal security. It really worries me to see him yesterday arriving at the Brasilia airport with a huge crowd around him. The personal contact there was just half a meter away. We've already seen what happened to his father in 2018 in Juiz de Fora, a stabbing, and that's how it is. Who will determine the size? The size of the American operation will be the drug traffickers themselves. Why? A more blunt reaction from them. Through kidnappings, attacks, assassinations, and retaliatory attacks on American companies in Brazil, it will involve the need for an increase in public security measures, which will require the National Public Security Force in the states. It will ultimately require the use of the armed forces and GLO operations to ensure business security, institutional security, and that's exactly what the army doesn't want right now. Because the army decided to stay out of this political discussion. Today, basically, there is only a state of exception in Brazil. Because those who don't agree that there is a state of exception in Brazil are actually part of that state of exception. Yeah, this only exists because those who hold the power of arms decided not to use them to ensure the full functioning of Brazilian institutions. You have the judiciary silencing the legislative. You have a situation where the government turns a blind eye to organized crime, and the armed forces act today as if nothing is happening. Well, they did so much that now it might come back to them if there is a more blunt reaction from drug trafficking, a reaction against the actions of the United States. They will end up having to control and stabilize public security, which is the last thing they thought could happen.
So it's kind of checkmate, because if you react, you'll force and legitimize the state to react because people will demand it. Yeah, we have a president who has already made his position clear, but we have governors who have the courage to react. Yeah, and then if you act with violence, the state will have to act with violence. So it's a cycle that keeps going. You're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Have we reached that point in Brazil? Look, I just want to remind you of the philosopher Olavo de Carvalho. He said the following: the only way to save Brazil is, and he said this, if I'm not mistaken, in 2020, 2021, guys. It's been a long time since he said that. He said the following. Go look it up, okay? If you don't believe it, search for it on YouTube. He said, look, there's only one way to save Brazil, and it will be when the United States starts fighting the cartels and organized crime in response, including in response to Chinese communism. That's the only way to save Brazil. And then you look at what's happening today. Look, the United States is doing nothing more than taking care of its own interests at home. Right? Don't fool yourself into thinking that Trump loves the people of Brazil. He may admire Bolsonaro, Flavio Bolsonaro, but he doesn't get any votes here in Brazil, right? We don't elect anyone from the Republican Party, right? But this has become so deep that saving the United States is saving Brazil. Inevitably, it seems like things are going to change all over the world. In fact, they're already changing all over the world, right? It's to solve the problem in the Middle East. It ends up freeing the Iranians from the dictatorship there. The Ayatollah was already taken out at the beginning of the war, right? You mess with Hezbollah, you mess with Hamas, you mess with that whole network, right, of international terrorism in Europe. Then you end up freeing the Europeans even from the Chinese grip, right? And so on, right? We didn't even have time to talk in our chat today about China, about China's role in all of this, which actually is right at the top. Go ahead, Commander. Yeah.
You just touched on a sore spot there, because we also have data that's been released in open sources, right? That recently in Sao Paulo, police operations tracked 1 billion, if I'm not mistaken, raise, 1 billion raise that was laundered from the PCC involving Chinese nationals. And what does this show then? Is the PCC operating there in China, or are Chinese nationals who are in Sao Paulo somehow connected to these shady transactions, right? Of course, from the criminal organization. So indirectly, this connects us, and maybe with this,
Understand.
Because China also, in a way, from what I know, doesn't endorse this unilateral move, right? Because it was unilateral from the United States, we have to acknowledge that, but China doesn't endorse it, and that creates more conflict, let's say, between two major powers, right? Yeah, China doesn't accept this American interference. And most likely, I think China will probably support some kind of statement from the Brazilian government opposing this designation that was made yesterday.
For China, I'll pass the ball to Galante, and then we'll head into the home stretch. For China, it's good to have destabilized countries because that's when they always make more money. Having countries with weak governments, high inflation, lack of infrastructure, and all that. The PCC, the organized crime group that controls a quarter of Brazil's territory, favors business. Business for China, right? Because a nation without sovereignty, a weak, poor nation heading toward misery, is the perfect environment for the Communist Party to come in and take everything. Can you understand how deep this is, guys? All right. In this lesson we're having here with Commander Battistella and our correspondent in the United States, right, Mauricio Galante, who's in Texas now. Look at how deep this goes, guys. Look at where we're headed. The Chinese Communist Party is on the other side of the world, but it has a lot of interests here. Why? Because we have minerals that the United States really needs. We play a huge role in supplying food to the world. And we have food security, and we also have energy security. So for the Chinese, it's much better if Brazil belongs to China than to the United States. Do you understand? Where we end up in this global war, and then it reaches Aunt Marina's and Uncle Juanzinho Galante's dinner table.
Yeah, it's interesting to highlight PCC, the acronym PCC, First Capital Command. But it's the same acronym in Portuguese, Partido Comunista Chinês. Yeah.
That's true.
They are partners because for the PCC to act as a drug exporter, those drugs have to leave through ports and airports. If you look, who controls 30 of the ports and airports in Brazil? Chinese companies. And there is no private Chinese company. That doesn't exist in the Communist Party. A company only operates with the approval of the Communist Party, and it owes favors and obligations to the Communist Party. So, who is the world's biggest producer of precursors for fentanyl production? It's China. In fact, in the meeting between Trump and Xi Jinping last month or a few weeks ago, this was discussed. China has a long-term war plan against the United States, hybrid warfare. So it's an attack on the financial system, an attack on the energy system, data communication systems, the internet. You have the wearing down of US military resources that is sponsoring conflicts in the Middle East, conflicts in Asia, in Africa. For what purpose? So that American military resources are mobilized around the world so that they have a clear path to invade Taiwan, because that's the only reason their armed forces exist, which is to retake the island of Taiwan. And you have the war in the agricultural sector, the threat to the agricultural sector, where they are manipulating prices. There are billions in investments in Brazilian land to manipulate prices and undermine food security, causing food insecurity in the United States. Galante. So the issue of the PCC is just one more front. They're longtime money launderers. Damn, this financial system, that's why Dilma, who's the president of the BRICS there, and Lula keep insisting on this point. They want to change the global financial system for Brazil to join China's financial system, which is part of the BRICS. So they can get out of the SWIFT system, because everything we're talking about here is that money can only be tracked if they operate within the SWIFT system, which is the American system. If they operate within the Chinese SWIFT system, there's no way to track them. It's over. No, it's not over. Yeah, they're going to keep growing. And the question will be, how do they keep growing if they're not moving money in our financial system? There's no financial operation here. How do they keep growing? Where are they operating? In the only financial system, the alternative is the Chinese one. Then you'll see who partners with or owns whom, right?
Galante, just so the audience following us here can understand the depth of this, the Chinese Communist Party is willing to lose money in order to cripple the competition. They're doing this in Brazil. They're doing this in Europe. What did they do, guys? They sell hybrid cars in Europe for dirt cheap prices, losing money to drive European competitors out of business. So they go there, they wipe out BMW, Mercedes, Porsche, Fiat, Ford, whatever is in Europe. They can't compete because the Chinese government subsidizes hybrid and electric car factories. So they sell really cheap, the government takes the loss, they drive the European companies out of business, and then who is Europe dependent on? On the Chinese factories. And that's when they take everything they can. And in Brazil, this is happening with soybeans, with Brazil's commodities, right? They come in, they monopolize everything, take away our capacity, take away our technology, and take it to China. We end up eternally dependent on them. To buy nails or screws, you have to beg Xi Jinping and tell him, look, I'm going to use these nails for this project, which will serve this and that purpose, and here are the specifications of my project and my idea. What do the Chinese do? They take your project, take your idea, replicate it, build it, and push you out of the market as well. And that's how they end up dominating everything. But this isn't shown in global soap operas or on Fantastico.
I hope that the operators, that the intelligence analysts working in the corporate world advise their CEOs with this data, right? Yeah, I think that's one of the ideas, to contribute so that the intelligence field in Brazil grows and the Brazilian corporate world understands these geopolitical relations. I'm abstaining from any ideological thinking, but how? How does that affect capital and the company's balance sheet when the company is making or receiving an investment? Yeah, how is our Ibovespa today in relation to yesterday's measure, and how is the dollar going to behave? And as has already been said here, just to reinforce, yes, there is a risk of impact. You asked, Shimon, I believe, as Galante answered, I don't see at first this measure bringing a direct economic benefit. Yes. The socio-economic issue has to do with how the Brazilian state will behave in order to effectively take measures to combat organized crime. Because then I can only understand that our society will grow, our economy will improve. This underground economy that is financed by organized crime, we have to fight against it. All right?
And the last issue I would like to highlight here, since I've been working on this subject for a while, is the issue of electoral integrity. It became clear to the United States that the association of the global left, not only the global left, but also the global Islamic movement. This is a very curious fact, very interesting. One of the biggest threats here to the United States is this alignment of the left with Islamism, because the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
That's true.
That's the principle they operate together on. So it became clear to the United States that the left-wing government in Brazil is aligned with China, and it doesn't favor American interests in the Western Hemisphere. And it remains to be seen how long the United States will tolerate the lack of electoral integrity in Brazil. In other words, the electoral process does not comply with Brazil's own constitution. There is no public counting. The public counting will only happen if the voter manages to, each voter checks their vote on a piece of paper, a printout, and deposits it. And that's the first count. Public counting is really each voter counting their own vote. Afterwards, what will be done, the processing of this is an administrative matter. But today there isn't. Today, Brazil and Bhutan are the only places in the whole world that use first-generation voting machines. And this makes it easier to have corruption, manipulation by those who might be in power in Brazil. NA. Starting in October or next year, will Lula's government continue, or is there room for another candidate? So that these problems of fighting drug trafficking and the geopolitical alignment with the United States can happen? So the question that remains is, until when? President Trump, who knows this information, he is fully aware. I myself sent a letter to him as soon as he was elected 2 weeks later when he appointed Rubio. And I received a direct response from his advisors when I asked him not to accept the results of this year's election, 2026. Using the same criteria that he used against Venezuela, that there is no disaggregated data. In other words, Venezuela did not show the disaggregated data or the paper slip, because there the machines have a paper printout, and the State Department did not accept the results of the elections in Venezuela on August 1st, 2024. It remains to be seen whether the United States will accept the result of the Brazilian election with this current electoral system.
And remember, it was Biden who didn't accept it, right? Biden said who didn't
accept was the one on the left.
Exactly. It's not Trump. Didn't reject it because it's right wing or left wing. No, they didn't accept it because first, it's a breeding ground for terrorism, right? In Venezuela, you had at least six bases of Iran and Hezbollah operating inside Venezuela. You had an Iranian general as the foreign minister in Maduro's government. He was the one giving orders to Maduro. Like, now you're going to do this, now you're going to do that, now you're going to say this and that. So that's how it worked. And it was the Biden administration that said, no, that's nonsense, right? That election was a sham. That election was rigged. So it wasn't Trump who was there going after Maduro. No, the American left itself understands, because they're also being destroyed. If they stay quiet, even the American left, Galante, right, who sometimes has trouble perceiving reality, they get devoured by China. Why? Because it's the Western way of life. It's American democracy, right? It's who the Americans are, who the West is. They are rejected. When we talk about the West, we are also included in this as a threat to Chinese interests and so on. This isn't a conspiracy theory, guys. If you start pulling the thread, everything leads back to the Chinese Communist Party. Go ahead, Commander.
I'd actually like to pick up on what you're saying, because I'm really concerned about certain instances of Chinese interference. And if I'm not mistaken, recently representatives from our Supreme Federal Court, and I think even from the Superior Military Court, are in China. They have been or are here anyway this week. Or we would have improvements to the Brazilian judicial system, somehow bringing some technology, let's call it that, from China. Despite this technological issue, if I could just limit myself to that, from a counterintelligence perspective, and here I am referring mainly to the Brazilian judicial system as a whole and to the judicial system. Here I also include issues related to public security and law enforcement agencies, encompassing the public prosecutor's office and also the police. Yes, because one possible consequence is a higher level of organized crime infiltration in these organizations. So, I would like to leave here as a message for public agencies to pay attention to their internal teams. That they pay attention, right, to behaviors that are not consistent with ethics, morality, and good public service. Because of people who are infiltrated under a guise of good behavior, but are actually working for organized crime. This challenge is enormous. And obviously, we're talking here about logistical issues, political issues, operational issues related to this. But the judiciary system, right? How is the Brazilian judiciary also going to respond to this new designation? It's very important. In other words, it's about the three branches of government. How the executive branch will respond, how our legislative branch will respond, and how the entire structure of our judiciary will now respond to this new reality.
Impressive. That's right. Galante, what's your social media, Galante, so people can follow you now, YouTube and Instagram? Guys, now let's all go there together. Let's boost Galante's channel. We need, guys, 100,000 followers for Galante, okay? We need to get 100,000 followers there. We have a big project happening, and we need Galante to have 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, and then you guys will get a gift. So go ahead, Galante, tell them your social media.
On YouTube, it's mgalante_magalante_use, and on Instagram, Mauricio Galante, mauriciogalante.us, and on Twitter, it's also mgalante_magalante_use. If you search my name, Mauricio Galante, on any social network, you'll find me. I'm the only Brazilian elected as a city councilman in Arlington, Texas. I'm proud to represent the American people. I was elected by the American people, and we do this work because I understand that today a window of opportunities has opened, a historic opportunity for collaboration between the United States and Brazil, for the United States to once again be the top commercial and geopolitical partner, bringing progress, prosperity, and security to both Brazilians and Americans. I thank you for the space, the kindness, the friendship of Shimon, the friendship of my great friend, my veteran Commander Batistella, and we'll see each other next time. Yes.
Very well. Guys, look, Galante is doing a collab here with the channel, so just click on his profile, subscribe there, and say, I came from Shimon Oliveira, okay? Subscribe there. Let's boost Galante. And Commander Batistella, a Navy captain, this guy has already commanded a warship. Don't mess with him. Commander, you have a fantastic book. I've already started reading this book. Okay? People can find it on Amazon. I'll leave the link now for you to click and buy the Commander's book. There it is. Look, it's in Galante's hand, right? It made it to the United States. There are two versions. For those of you who are outside Brazil, it's in English, okay? With the expanded version where he talks about beam, talks about the parallel beam, okay? And there's also the Portuguese version on Amazon. Okay, Commander, this book will teach Brazilians how to read the bigger picture. You, intelligence, you will understand. You will stop being the government's fool and you will understand how this world really works. Commander, what's your social media?
Look, I'll share it, but from my experience as an intelligence operator, we always act in a discreet way. But answering your question, because someone in intelligence people aren't really into social media, but my social media is.
I've really learned a lot on Instagram with channels, including yours, Shimon, as well as others. Yeah, Luis with an S, Luis Fernando Batistella. I'm Batistella. I'm there. I try to share some knowledge and keep up. And on LinkedIn too, Luis Fernando Batistella. That's where I keep up a little with topics about intelligence and counterintelligence. And as you said, the purpose of the book is to bring technical knowledge, academic knowledge, and to contribute especially to the corporate sector for the understanding of these geopolitical dynamics with intelligence and counterintelligence. That is the purest purpose of the book.
Really, folks, look, you are being rewarded here by the channel because you won't find Galante just hanging around on the street. No, you won't find him on the street. He's in Texas. He's dealing with the American government.
It's even dangerous.
Yeah, he's in Texas. And also he's speaking on some of the biggest channels in Brazil and around the world about politics and geopolitics. So bringing him here is a gift for you from our channel. And when was the last time you heard a Navy captain, an experienced Navy commander, bringing intelligence information to you right there in your living room? There isn't. The guy isn't going to your house to give you a lecture for free. So guys, leave a like, share, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. Here is our QR code for our intelligence bunker, where there is no censorship. There we really criticize the magic boxes used in the leader selection process. Look, we even have to maneuver just to talk about it. There we name names, we give addresses, it's all there. Click and come to our intelligence bunker. There are already more than 3,000 people who fund what we bring here. We also made a channel for movies and series. Check out Galante. The channel link is in the video description, the first pinned comment, and on the card. Galante premiered a series that Brazilians love, Casca Grossa, which is Dutton Ranch, which is happening there in Texas. This series is airing there. Yeah, and it doesn't have political correctness. It doesn't have whining. It doesn't have woke culture, and we're talking about it. So people can watch and understand that there's been a turnaround in American cinema, that they're putting an end to this political correctness, Galante. In the first scene of the series, a guy shows up. Look, I'm going to give a quick spoiler. In the very first episode, in the first few minutes, look at how they stirred things up. A guy showed up, there was a snake. The guy said, there's a snake over there. Another cowboy came and boom, he stepped on the snake's head. And he threw the snake aside. If it were a series, a woke series, they would have to call the firemen. They would have to call the vet to rescue the little snake and take the little snake and release it alive. That would be the right thing to do. But this series is so disruptive that the guy comes in smashing everything. So on our series and movies channel, you can keep up. Galante, there was a cultural change in the United States too, right?
Yes, the city of Fort Worth, right next door, is now the second capital, the biggest film capital in the United States. Look at that. It's a $1.6 billion project. This Dutton Ranch is being filmed here. There are other series too. Wow, 1893 was filmed here. That Christian series, The Chosen, is filmed here. Actually, in The Chosen, little James, James, one of the actors who plays an apostle of Christ, he's the son of the mayor of this city here. Wow. Jim, he's also a great friend of mine. And you have people from the film industry coming here because of tax exemptions, because of economic incentives to bring the film industry here. Our own city is now creating a cultural destination. It would be a cultural, artistic zone to give tax incentives for film. And that's it. People are tired of blah, blah, blah. People are tired of whining. People are tired of half-truths. We say Wall Street is over. Now it's Main Street. People want to know, they want to watch, consume news, reality movies, series that talk about everyday life without this manipulation of the truth.
If this kind of conversation we had here happened in schools and universities with students, our nation would be the most powerful on the planet because we need to have awareness and a level of consciousness. Today, the average level of consciousness of Brazilians, with all due respect, folks, is like that of a monkey, right? You're worried. Look, Daylin became the queen, became a role model. Suzanne Richthofen, who had her parents killed. Her movie came out on Netflix, and she's on a reality show on one of the biggest TV channels in Brazil. This is what Brazil has come to, folks.
So a total inversion of values.
Total inversion of values. So we'll end with this. Now is the time for you to shield your mind, okay? Shield your mind. I'm Shimon Oliveira, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye, everyone.